It's really interesting when you start to notice how important safety has become
Yeah.
in so many different areas.
Mm.
It's not just like, keeping workers safe on a construction site anymore.
You're right.
It's
Yeah.
even in things like sports. You're seeing
Absolutely.
all this new gear and equipment designed to protect athletes better.
Yeah, for sure.
And that got us thinking about a really specific market, and that is cut-resistant fabrics.
Interesting.
So we've been diving deep into an industry report on this, and it's
Yeah.
really eye-opening to see all the different ways that these fabrics are being used
I bet.
and just how big this market actually is.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area.
So, this report that we've been looking at, it paints a really comprehensive picture of the global cut-resistant fabric market.
Mm-hmm.
And they estimate that in 2025, this industry is going to be worth around USD 6,280 million.
That's huge.
So today, we're going to try to break down this market,
Mhm.
understand its size, what's driving its growth, what materials are being used, where the demand is coming from,
Right.
and what the future holds for this industry.
Sounds good.
Okay, so $6.28 billion, that's a lot of money.
It is.
That's a big market already. So
Yeah.
where do they see this going?
Well, the report projects that the market is going to continue to grow
Okay.
quite significantly, in fact.
Oh.
From that starting point of USD 600 and 280 million in 2025, they forecast that it will reach USD 900 and 711.1 million by 2033.
Wow.
So that represents a CAGR, a compound annual growth rate of 5.60%.
Wow, that's pretty significant growth.
Yeah, it's not a small amount at all.
So what's driving that? Why are we going to need so many more cut-resistant fabrics?
Well, there are a couple of key drivers here.
Okay.
One is the increasing demand for personal protective equipment, or PPE, in high-risk industries.
Yeah.
Think about manufacturing, construction, any place where workers are handling sharp objects.
Sure. There's a growing need to keep those workers safe.
Absolutely, makes sense.
And then the second big driver is stricter workplace safety regulations.
Yeah.
So you've got governments around the world putting in place tougher rules to protect workers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pushing companies to invest more in things like cut-resistant fabrics for their employees.
Right, it's all about minimizing risk.
Exactly. So it's a combination of kind of like this greater awareness of the risks involved,
Yeah.
and then also just like having more stringent rules in place
Uh-huh.
to actually enforce those safety measures.
Makes sense.
Okay, so we're seeing this growth globally, but how does that break down regionally? Where are the biggest markets for these fabrics right now?
So currently, North America is the leader.
Okay.
They hold the largest share of the market, accounting for over 40% globally in 2025.
Wow.
Their market size is estimated at USD 2,323.60 million,
Okay.
and they're projected to see a 20 AGR of 4.1% between 2025 and 2033.
Okay, so they're starting from a big base,
Yes.
and they're continuing to grow.
Exactly.
What's giving North America that edge? What's making them the biggest market?
Well, a big chunk of it is the United States. They have a very large market, estimated at USD 1833.32 million in 2025,
Okay.
and a projected CAGR of 3.9%.
Got it.
And a lot of that demand is coming from the military and law enforcement sectors,
Right.
as well as their large industrial and construction sectors.
And so,
Canada also has a sizable market at USD 278.83 million, with a CGR of 4.9%.
okay.
And then Mexico comes in at USD 211.45 million, with a CGR of 4.6%.
Got it.
So altogether, that makes North America the dominant force right now.
So a lot of it is that they're already a pretty big market.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of continuing on that trajectory.
Exactly.
What about Europe?
Yeah, so Europe is another major player.
Okay.
They have over 30% of the global market share,
Okay.
with a market size estimated at USD 1821.60 million in 2025.
Okay.
And their growth is projected to be at a CGR of 4.7%.
Okay, so a little bit faster than North America, but not by a huge amount.
Yeah, it's a healthy growth rate.
Yeah, are there any specific countries in Europe that are kind of driving that demand?
Yeah, there are a few key players in Europe.
Okay.
One is the UK. They have a substantial market, estimated at USD 305.96 million,
Okay.
with a pretty strong CAGR of 5.5%.
Okay.
And a lot of that is being driven by their manufacturing sector.
Okay.
They have a need for PPE in industries like automotive construction, even healthcare.
Right.
Then you've got Germany. They
Right.
have a slightly larger market at USD 360.60 million
Okay.
and a CAGR of 4.9%.
Okay.
And their strength comes from their huge automotive and engineering industries.
Right.
They also have really strict safety standards.
Makes
So
sense.
those are really driving the demand there.
Okay, makes sense. So the industrial base in Germany is a big factor there.
Definitely.
You also mentioned France, Italy, and Russia.
Yes.
So those are all substantial markets as well.
Yes, they are all contributing to Europe's overall position in the market.
Okay, so overall, it sounds like Europe's strength in the automotive and manufacturing sectors and their emphasis on worker safety are really what's driving the demand for cut-resistant fabrics there.
Exactly. The report even mentioned that global car manufacturing is on the rise, and Europe is seeing a pretty big increase in car production, too.
So that suggests that the need for cut-resistant fabrics is probably going to keep growing in those industries, right?
That's very likely, especially with the continued growth in these sectors.
Now, the report also highlighted Asia-Pacific as a region with a lot of potential for growth.
Yeah, APAC is definitely one to watch.
Okay.
Right now, they hold around 23% of the global market share,
Okay.
and their market size in 2025 is estimated at USD 207.70 million.
Okay, so a decent-sized market already.
Yeah, but what's really interesting is their projected AGR, which is a massive 8.3%.
Wow, 8.3%. That's way higher than North America or Europe.
Yeah, it's the fastest growing region by a significant margin.
So what's causing that kind of explosive growth in that region?
Well, it's a combination of things.
Okay.
A lot of it has to do with the booming industries in APAC, like construction, mining, metal fabrication, oil and gas.
Right. There's a lot of activity in those sectors.
Definitely. And unfortunately, those are industries where workplace injuries are not uncommon.
Yeah, I could see how that would drive demand for safety equipment.
Exactly.
And you've got countries like China and India, which have massive manufacturing and construction sectors. And they're starting to put more emphasis on workplace safety regulations and actually enforcing those regulations.
They are, and it's about time.
Yeah, it's definitely a step in the right direction.
For sure.
You know, the report even mentioned that there's been a rise in injury rates in construction and manufacturing in China.
Yeah, it's a problem they're trying to tackle.
And in India as well, a lot of workplace accidents happen in the construction sector. So that makes sense that they're focusing on safety measures.
Absolutely. And it's driving the need for things like cut-resistant fabrics.
Yeah, for sure.
When we look at the specific markets in APAC, China is a major one, with a market size of USD 633.02 million and a CGR of 6.9%.
Okay.
India is showing really impressive growth, with a market size of USD 150.72 million and a key GR of 9.3%.
Where? 9.3%? That's amazing.
It is. It really shows the potential in that market.
In Japan and South Korea.
Yeah, they're also demonstrating strong expansion in this area.
Okay, so it sounds like the whole region is kind of going through this industrial boom.
Yeah.
And that's creating a greater awareness of the need for worker protection.
Absolutely. It's all connected.
So I've talked about North America, Europe, Asia Pacific. What about the other regions?
Right. So South America has a market share of over 5%, with a market size of USD 238.64 million in 2025 and a projected KGR of 6.3%.
Okay.
The main markets there are Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia.
Okay. And what's driving the demand in South America?
It's largely due to their position as a major global mining region.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Mining is an inherently risky industry. Yeah.
So it makes sense that they'd need a lot of protective gear.
For sure, they need that high level of cut resistance to protect their workers.
What about the Middle East?
Yeah, so the Middle East has about 2% of the global market share.
Okay.
With a market size estimated at USD 251.2 thousand million in 2025.
Okay.
And they have a strong CGR of 6.9%.
Okay, that's pretty solid growth.
Yeah, it's a growing market.
What are the main markets in that region?
The biggest ones are Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
Okay.
And the drivers there are their significant oil and gas sector.
Right, and all the large-scale infrastructure projects that they have underway.
Exactly.
So again, a lot of industrial activity that requires worker protection.
Yes, and those industries in particular have a lot of potential hazards.
Right, okay, and then finally Africa.
Africa holds about 1% of the global market share currently.
Okay.
Their market size in 2025 is estimated at USD 138.16 million.
Okay.
And they have a CGR of 5.9%.
Okay.
So South Africa and Nigeria are the biggest markets there.
And what's driving the demand in Africa?
It's a combination of rapid urbanization and increasing investment in infrastructure projects across the continent.
Yeah, that makes sense.
As they develop and build more, they need to ensure the safety of their workers.
It's really interesting to see how all these different factors
Yeah.
and different industries are kind of coming together
hmm
to shape the demand for these fabrics around the world.
It really is a global market.
It is. Okay, so we've talked about the overall market size.
Yeah.
We've talked about the growth, the regional breakdown.
hmm
Let's get into the actual fabrics themselves.
Sure.
What are these things made of? What are some of the key materials that are being used?
Okay, so the report highlighted a few dominant material types.
Okay.
Right now, ceramic materials are likely holding the largest share of the market.
Interesting. Ceramic.
Yeah, it might sound surprising, but they're incredibly effective.
Okay.
It's because of their hardness and their ability to distribute force really well.
Huh.
So that gives them exceptional cut resistance.
So it's not like the ceramic you'd find in a coffee mug or something?
No, no, not exactly. It's more like the kind of ceramic used in high-performance applications,
Mm.
like you might see in some heavy-duty tools.
Okay, so it's designed to withstand a lot of force.
Exactly. And that makes them really valuable in demanding applications,
Okay.
like in the military, law enforcement, and heavy industrial sectors.
So places where people are really at risk of serious cuts.
Yes, where they need that extreme protection.
Okay, but the report also mentioned that there's another material segment that's growing really fast.
Yeah, that's high-performance polyethylene, or HPCE.
Okay, HPPE, I've heard of that.
It's becoming increasingly popular.
Okay, what makes it so special?
Well, it's got this amazing combination of properties.
Okay.
It offers exceptional cut resistance,
Okay.
but it's also incredibly lightweight.
So it's strong, but not bulky.
Exactly.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and in some cases, it can be up to 15 times stronger than steel by weight.
15 times stronger than steel. That's crazy.
It is pretty remarkable.
So it's like super strong, but doesn't weigh you down.
Right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And it's also got high impact resistance. It has a low friction coefficient, which means it's very durable,
Okay.
and it's still flexible.
So it's comfortable to wear.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes it really ideal for things like gloves and protective clothing.
Absolutely. You need that dexterity and comfort in those applications.
So it sounds like we're seeing this kind of trend towards these advanced polymers
Yeah.
that can offer this really high level of performance without adding all that extra weight.
Right. It's all about finding that balance.
So the report also talked about different resistance levels for these fabrics.
Yeah. They broke down the market by the level of cut resistance the fabrics offer.
Okay, so what are those different levels?
Well, currently, resistance level 3 holds the largest market share.
Okay, what does level 3 mean?
So level 3 fabrics provide a good balance of protection for industries where workers handle sharp tools regularly, but don't face extreme cutting hazards.
Okay, so I'm thinking like automotive plants, maybe food processing, places like that.
Exactly, those types of environments.
Okay, so where cuts are a risk, but not from really heavy-duty machinery or anything like that.
Right.
Gotcha. So what about the higher levels?
Well, the resistance level 4 segment is growing pretty rapidly.
Okay.
And these fabrics are designed to provide heavy-duty protection.
So this is for like the really dangerous stuff.
Yeah, think sharper blades, sheet metal, glass, the hazards you find around heavy machinery.
Okay, so it's like a step up in protection.
Exactly.
What's driving the demand for those level 4 fabrics?
One big factor is the increasing emphasis on meeting international safety standards,
Okay.
like EN 388 and ISO 13997.
Okay, so those are like standardized tests for cut resistance.
Yeah, they measure how water material holds up against cuts.
Got it.
And compliance with those standards is becoming really important in certain industries,
Okay, like where?
like construction, heavy machinery, anywhere they're dealing with materials like reinforced steel or using powerful cutting tools.
Okay, so those are the areas where you really need that top-level protection.
Exactly. It's all about minimizing the risk of serious injury.
It sounds like as those safety regulations become more and more strict,
Yeah.
we're probably going to see even more demand for these higher resistance level fabrics.
That's a very likely scenario.
Okay, so we've got all these amazing fabrics with different levels of protection.
Yeah.
So where are they actually being used? What are the main applications for cut-resistant fabrics?
As you might expect, the biggest application segment is personal protective equipment, or PPE.
Okay, makes sense.
And the major consumers are industries like manufacturing, construction, oil and gas, mining, automotive, aerospace, even glass handling.
Wow, so it's like a whole range of industries.
It really is, and it's interesting because the trend towards automation in manufacturing is actually increasing the need for even better PPE.
Oh, why is that?
Well, as you have more automated processes, workers are interacting with more advanced and potentially more hazardous machinery.
So the machines are doing more, but the risks are still there for the people working with them.
Exactly. So you need that higher level of protection to keep workers safe.
Okay, so that's the traditional use of these fabrics.
Yeah.
But the report also highlighted another area that's growing really quickly.
Yes, it's sportswear.
Sportswear. That's not what I would have
I
expected.
know, it might seem surprising.
Yeah, but why sportswear?
Well, if you think about it, there are a lot of sports where athletes face a real risk of cuts and lacerations.
Yeah, okay, I see what you mean.
Contact sports, extreme sports.
Right? Things like ice hockey, fencing,
Mm-hmm.
cycling.
Especially in crashes,
Yeah,
motor racing, skiing, martial arts,
yeah.
right?
All of those have the potential for serious cuts.
Exactly. So using cut-resistant fabrics in sportswear makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so they're incorporating these fabrics into the clothing.
Yeah, they're being used in things like gloves, shirts, pants, even protective sleeves.
Okay, so it's not just about protecting workers anymore, it's about protecting athletes as well.
Exactly. It's about safety in all areas of life.
So the report also talked about some of the broader market drivers,
Yeah.
restraints,
Yeah.
and emerging trends. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Sure. So the key drivers, as we've discussed, are the increasing focus on industrial and occupational safety.
The growth of the healthcare and medical sector,
Yeah,
because that also creates demand for specialized protective wear,
absolutely.
and the rising demand from the military and defense sectors.
Right.
So those are kind of like the big three pushing this market forward.
Yeah, those are the major forces.
Okay. What about restraints? What are some of the things that are holding this market back?
Well, one of the big ones is the cost.
Okay.
The raw materials for these advanced fabrics can be expensive,
Right.
and the manufacturing processes can be complex, so that adds to the cost.
Yeah, it's not a simple thing to produce these high-performance fabrics.
And then there's also the challenge of balancing protection with comfort,
That's a big one.
especially with the heavier duty fabrics. Right, you want something that's going to protect you, but it can't be so bulky or uncomfortable that you can't work effectively.
Makes sense. So those are some of the challenges they're facing.
Yeah, they're constantly working on improving those aspects.
Okay, and what about trends? What's new and exciting in the world of cut-resistant fabrics?
Well, there's a lot of focus on technological advancements in manufacturing.
Okay, so they're finding ways to make these fabrics better.
Yeah, they're always trying to improve the durability, the flexibility, the overall performance,
Okay.
and potentially making manufacturing more cost-effective.
Right, so trying to bring those costs down.
Exactly. And another big trend is the growing demand for sustainable and eco-friendly fabrics.
Oh, yeah. Sustainability is becoming so important everywhere.
It is, and this industry is no exception.
So they're looking at materials and processes that are less harmful to the environment.
Right. It's all about trying to make things more sustainable and responsible.
Okay, so finally, the report gave a brief overview of the competitive landscape in this market.
Yeah, they talked about some of the key players.
So what's it like out there? Who are the big names?
Well, it's a pretty competitive market.
Okay.
There are a lot of companies vying for market share.
Right? And they're all focused on innovation, both in terms of the products themselves and the materials they're using.
Makes sense. They're also really emphasizing sustainability in their processes
Okay.
and making sure that their products meet all those increasingly stringent global safety regulations.
Right, because those regulations are only getting tougher.
Exactly. So they're constantly trying to develop fabrics that are more durable, more flexible, more comfortable, while still providing that high level of cut resistance.
And tailoring those fabrics to the specific needs of different industries.
Absolutely. It's a very dynamic market.
Yeah, I bet.
The report even highlighted a cool collaboration between War Road Original Hockey Co., Noble Biomaterials, and Putlon.
Oh, what did they do?
They introduced an antimicrobial on-ice performance collection that incorporated Dyneema cut-resistant fabric.
Okay, so they're combining different technologies to create these new fabrics.
Yeah, and that kind of partnership really shows the innovation that's happening in this market.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of competition, but also a lot of collaboration and creativity.
Definitely. It's a really exciting space to watch.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of cut-resistant fabrics,
Yeah.
what are the most important things you want our listeners to take away from this discussion?
Well, I think the key takeaway is that this market is projected for significant growth,
Okay.
expanding from almost USD 6.3 billion in 2025 to over USD 9.7 billion by 2033.
So it's a market that's on the move,
Definitely.
and it's not slowing down anytime soon.
Right.
And we saw that while North America is currently the biggest player,
Mm-hmm.
the Asia-Pacific region is expected to see the fastest growth.
Yeah, that's where a lot of the action is going to be.
And then in terms of materials,
Yeah.
Ceramics are still strong in those high protection applications.
Mm.
But HPPE is really gaining traction in areas where you need lightweight strength
Yeah.
and flexibility.
Yeah, it's a versatile material.
And then finally, we talked about applications.
Mm-hmm.
PPE is still the dominant sector.
Yeah.
But that growth in sportswear is a really interesting trend.
It is. It shows how these fabrics are finding their way into all sorts of areas.
Yeah, it's not just about protecting workers anymore.
Exactly.
It's about protecting people in all kinds of activities.
And it's all driven by this growing global emphasis on safety.
Whether it's on the job or in our leisure time.
Absolutely. Safety is becoming paramount.
So it's more than just gloves in a factory setting.
Way more.
It's about thinking about protection in a whole new way.
Exactly. And that brings us to a final thought for our listeners.
Okay, hit us with it.
Think about how these advancements and trends in cut-resistant fabrics might influence the design of everyday products,
Interesting.
or how they might shape the evolution of safety regulations and fields that you find interesting.
Okay, so looking beyond just the traditional uses.
Right, because as the technology keeps improving and potentially becomes more affordable,
Yeah.
we might see some really unexpected applications emerge.
Okay, so like what? Give us an example.
Well, imagine cut-resistant fabrics being incorporated into furniture
Okay.
to prevent injuries in the home
Oh, that's interesting.
or in children's clothing
Okay.
to reduce the risk of cuts and scrapes,
Yeah, I could see that.
or even in medical devices to improve patient safety.
So the possibilities are kind of endless.
They really are, and it's fascinating to think about how this technology could shape our lives in the future.
It's definitely a market to keep an eye on.
For sure. It's got a lot of potential.
Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
My pleasure.
It's been a really interesting deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.